Greetings, friends. So I got this email about 3 months ago. I was meaning to share this, but I'm just getting to it now. The email comes from someone who has sent emails before, and I've shared some of this person's thoughts. And I would never just spontaneously share your email if someone happens to email me. But this person is just sharing their thoughts. It's nothing personal about them, and I told them that I might discuss what they had to say because they're giving a topic some thought. So I'll give my own thoughts based on what they have to say. But the subject of the email is Communist Britain. Semi-detached housing drives wealthy man insane. He mentions that he's claimed that semi-detached housing is the root of many issues in the West, like many problems. And this is an example. There was some guy who owned $1 million home in the English countryside, but the price does not matter, as it was a communist semi-detached home. Communist buildings all have about the same value, a cheap value, as they are shared buildings. And the real value is going to come from space and privacy. He reportedly had many legal disputes with his neighbors, and people in his village would judge him on Facebook, among other things. He seemingly snapped and burnt himself alive in his car, I believe, which is an overreaction on his part, but I think people underestimate how frustrating communist living is and the toll it takes on you, especially when you come to the realization gradually of what you got yourself into. He wrote to a newspaper that, quote, gossip is the curse of village life. And that is what I would like to communicate about communist-style, semi-detached living. By sharing walls with neighbors 24/7, you are losing the ability to escape the world's judgment and be left in peace. That is like a 24/7 assault upon your mind. But the funny thing is that they've been isolating us. So it's interesting that we want peace from, he's going to talk about feeling like you're judged if you're out in the open. And that's true, we do want that. But then there's also the risk of going off the other end because we're also atomized, we're isolated, and we long, or at least I would think that many people long for a real community. But then, of course, the community is also where the gossip comes from. I guess it's just a balance that needs to be struck. Anyways, he continues, this is a very well-kept secret that people only realize when it's too late, that they have committed to living in a Soviet-style communist building for the foreseeable future, like mortgage or rental contract, and they have been ripped off. The difference between a £100,000 semi-detached house and a £1 million house is almost negligible, as they are built upon the same communistic principles. Space is not important. Privacy is not important. Quiet is not important. And land is not important. This is fascinating, by the way. These very, very good points. So all of the former that he's mentioned there, like space, privacy, quiet, land, all of these former things can be shared with your other residents. However, those four things are the most important and are the tenets of a home. I agree, there's something very natural and basic. You gotta have the actual space. You gotta have some repose on real land, and ideally real land means you got some grass. That would be a start. Maybe some bushes, trees. None of this apartment building living, not for me. Within 2 to 3 floors of the ground at least. That's the way I would look at it. And then he continues, it's like the phenomenon of boiling the frog. People have no idea how deep-rooted communism is in the West. I mean, he's using the word communism. I agree, there's a lot of communistic elements, but he also mentions that there's the capitalist elements too. So we're getting a bit of both, but it's the globalists, it's the financial power, it's the media, it's fundamentally a satanic system. The communism, it is useful in some sense in terms of the housing, like being crammed together. I guess that is, I can see why he would use that word. So He says that he would guess that most residential structures in Britain, for example, are shared buildings, townhouses, apartment blocks, or semi-detached houses. I don't live in England, of course, so I can't tell you. But I've looked on Google Maps of some towns in Ireland and in the UK too. But I remember seeing in Ireland specifically older and shorter buildings, which it's like, oh, it has more of a historical character. That's nice. But then still very urban in the sense that there's no grass, it's all stone, or everything's built up, everything's filled in, everything's so crammed together. If you had to urinate, where would you go without being exposed in public? It's like there's no easy alleys to find in some of these. It's the same thing in Latin America. The same exact thing, actually, cramming all these houses together. It's not actually very nice. You can see why when we built the suburbs earlier in the 20th century. Now, the suburbs ended up being spiritually void and sad. However, there's a powerful reason why we wanted to originally to have this space. We didn't want to be fully out of the urban world, but we wanted to have more space. We wanted to be closer to nature. That was a noble, true impetus that the suburbs was drawing upon. But our society, for other reasons, we built it for basically we put everything on the automobile. We made the automobile supreme. We made mobility supreme. We weren't actually interested in the community. So we wanted the space and the relaxation of being closer to nature, but we neglected our communities, and it all fell apart. So he continues, your home offers you a space away from the world and away from the judgment of other people. Well, before I read that, why don't I share some thoughts, because getting close to what he was saying about this communist style housing, well, I was handing out flyers having to do with the jib in your arm, the jib. Like, I was handing out some information about putting it in mailboxes in High Park North, which is like north of High Park. There's like a kind of like a middle class, but really, like, to live there you must have a lot of money. Like, you must, because the houses there are all crammed together, but they must be high value houses. They must be approaching $1 million or more than $1 million Canadian dollars, even though it's relatively small lots and they're all crammed together next to one another. Some of it is semi-detached, two basically down the middle. So there's one house on one side, but they share a common wall, and some of them are just standing on their own. But they're all crammed in there. Relatively nicer architecture, like maybe pre-war, so before everything got ugly. So nicer red brick houses. With some style and character to them. So a nice neighborhood, but overall a very densely packed neighborhood. So, and I didn't know, I was like, well, I'm gonna put some, I don't live in High Park North. I don't live in that neighborhood, but I was like, well, I'll put some, see what happens, because you gotta get the literature out to the actual middle class white people. You got at some point, like, you gotta go right to their houses. So I did, and it wasn't very long of walking up the street where the first person I encountered was some older guy. Maybe he was in his 60s, and he was like watering the lawn. I said something to him like, "Were you planning to get the Vaseline?" And he seemed annoyed that I was wanting to talk to him, and he was just a jerk. And I was just being trying to be positive and maybe give him a flyer. I wasn't trying to be intrusive. But he said, how about some privacy? And I just thought that was funny, because it's like we've been locked down for all these, or not me, but I mean, all these dumb people have allowed themselves to be locked down for such a long time, because this is Toronto, Canada, one of the worst lockdown areas in the entire world in terms of the length. You want more privacy? I mean, now, based on what we've been reading, some people don't get privacy, especially maybe in a more densely packed area like this. But this is his house, clearly. He can go back into his house at any time. how much social interaction do you really get in the city? Everyone's anonymous. See, that's the thing. There's the gossip thing that people want to get away from, but then there's also the empty anonymity of urban living where you don't talk to anyone because everyone's just a stranger. These are just the white liberals that have a high value house, but they're crammed in the sardine can with everyone else, basically. They just happen to have 10 times as much money as everyone else, and they can play the housing game, and they can flip houses and whatever, and they can put masks on their kids for sure. I mean, not all of these white liberals, but yeah, a lot of like put masks on their, if they're not already still wearing a mask themselves, they put masks on their kids. And then the next house, just a moment later, I'm going to put the flyer in the mailbox. So I'm walking up, and then the door opens at that specific time, and some guy is coming out. Like he just happened to be leaving the house at that moment, and he saw me. He saw that I wasn't wearing a mask, and then he got scared, and he said, "Oh." Like he went back inside the house, and I was like, "Oh, I'm just giving some information about the Vaseline," and he's like, "Oh, you can just put it in the mailbox," in kind of a soft voice. And I'm like, "Well, I don't know if you're the sort of person that's really going to want to read this material. Like, I don't know if maybe I put it in." But the thing is, this white guy, like taller than me, he was like 6'4" or 6'5", like broader shoulders than me, like a larger bone structure. He didn't look in any way unhealthy. He didn't look overweight. Like this guy was probably like 80 pounds heavier than me, but not well, maybe 60, I don't know. But well, at least 180. I mean, he was much taller than me. This guy should have way more. He should have like a healthy testosterone level, but then his voice was soft, and he's afraid of a guy who's shorter than him. This guy was probably around like just 40 years old. He was a little older than me. Clearly more successful than me if he has this house here. Probably has a kid, probably has a wife. And he's like afraid of me. I'm some stranger. I'm preventing him from leaving his house. He wanted to go out on an errand or something. Then then a minute later, 2 minutes later, because I'm continuing, and then I see him walking. He's like on the other side of the street from me, and he's wearing a mask. I'm just thinking like these people. This is the kind of people that are living in this communist housing. And then finally, I had one more encounter where I was about to put a flyer in a mailbox, and this is the sort of mailbox where it's just on the outside, so I didn't have to go up any steps or anything. And there was some guy playing ball with his 2 kids or something in the street, and he just, in a really condescending tone, or just not a very nice tone, he's like, "Oh, no thanks." Like just as I was about to put it in the mailbox, that's what he said. Like, "Oh, no thanks." And it's like, well, buddy, plenty of people have signs. They just put in like no flyers, no soliciting. As soon as I see any sign like that, I leave it alone, obviously. But there was no sign like that. There was nothing. So it's like, well, geez, why are you so annoyed that you're gonna make this dumb statement not to put something in your mailbox? He didn't even know what it was. But of course, would this guy be? I mean, because he said that to me, and then I started talking to him. I asked him like, "Oh, have you gotten the jib?" And he said, "Yeah, he got the AstraZeneca. He got that." And I was like, "Oh, have you had any blood clots?" And he's like, "Nope." And I just thought it was dumb. Like he already got that ahead of schedule probably, and he was so happy. And maybe he got his kids to get it too, for all I know. And yep, they're all crammed in there, those white liberals in their sardine communist neighborhood. So I just wanted to share that story. And let's continue reading. Your home offers you a space away from the world and away from the judgment of other people. The overwhelming majority of people on earth are angry, and thus they are judgmental. Your home is a space to escape that for a while. It is unnatural for man to judge man. That is God's job, not ours. So it only brings about death and destruction. It is unhealthy to be so close to different households and their judgmental natures. You can't be too loud or face judgment from your neighbors. If your neighbors are loud, you are now in conflict with them. If you have cases of thin walls, You can't even comfortably have a private conversation in your own home. You are second guessing if you can be heard, if it's too late to vacuum, whether your musical instrument is bothering your neighbors. Plumbing issues and other structural issues are now civil disputes between two households. It's hell. Constant conflict and constant interference in your life from other people. I heard most police calls are regarding neighbors' disputes, but this was a while ago. And then he says at the end something that I found interesting to consider. And it will be an interesting way to conclude this video, considering this question. He says that he would take a home in a developing country over a communist building any day. We both have water, heating of some kind, a way to cook, a way to clean, furniture, the internet, although maybe the electricity isn't on all the time. Okay, what else do you need? There isn't too much to a functional home. I'd also get much more space, a detached house, likely a front garden, and a back garden too. Would you say the average Canadian is living a better life than the average Ghanaian? And maybe he's seen some of my videos on Ghana, so that's probably why he's asking or using that country. And I thought about it, and I mean, well, first of all, it's true, there isn't too much to a functional home. Yeah. And to make it better than a communist one, yeah, you have the space, the land, quiet, privacy. And I would add communities, in a community, in a good community. That would be the final thing that I would add there. In a good community. I don't know if I would want to be completely isolated. And I would say that the average Canadian is living a better life than the average Ghanaian in some ways. And in other ways, the Ghanaian has the better life. So Canadians live longer, there's less poverty here. But in Ghana, apart from its big city, there isn't so much of this communist style living as we've been describing it. Like, there's going to be more free space over there because most people don't live in cities. Most people live in the countryside, in villages and towns. Now, granted, they're going to have to deal with a lot of gossip, so the gossip factor is going to be there. Actually, there's probably going to be more gossip in smaller communities in the countryside than in a big city, I would guess. Maybe in some countries that there's gossip in the big city too, but that's not the same thing as being in a tightly packed neighborhood where everyone can hear you and smell you, and like, you know, there are trade-offs here. But still, it's nice that they have more of the basic elements that I think humans were meant to have. Fresh air, generally speaking, and maybe not always the best access to water, but they're going to get, in some sense, more sun and more fresh air a lot of the time. They don't have to spend all year, like half the year indoors, and they don't lounge around indoors. They stopped doing lockdowns in Ghana much earlier than they did in Western countries, like by the fall. By September, they already stopped. And I don't assume many Ghanaians are wearing masks right now. And Ghana is not breeding bug people like the West is. So in some sense, Ghanaians do live a more natural, conservative life. Like, I mean, the culture is more conservative. There's not the LGBT and just, you know, all that sort of stuff over there. There might be a little bit of it, but it's nowhere near on the scale as in the West. And so in some sense, this is more in tune with how humans were meant to live. That sort of life is going to have more meaning than the life that many people live in the West today, at least in these types of urban situations and communist housing. Hasta luego, amigos.